An old book. Book about witchcraft.
You're listening to the Whitewood Podcast, a show about mystery schools, the occult, and witchcraft.
Would you like to have a look around?
Why have you come to Whitewood?
Well, because I'm interested in witchcraft.
I'm your host, Nate. Come with us as we delve into the history, techniques, and backstories of these traditions and the people who practice them.
All right, welcome to the Whitewood Podcast. This is the introductory episode. In this episode, we're going to talk about a lot less of the actual show itself, a lot less long-form discussion about stuff. And instead, we're just going to talk about, who am I? What types of materials am I using to create the show? Why make a show like this? What's the point? What's my place in all of this? What has gotten me interested in the occult? And really try to kind of take it from there. So, without further ado, I say we get started. So the very first question I'm sure a lot of people have is, who am I? What is my place in the occult, and why am I interested in the first place of even doing that? So, as I've said before, my name is Nate. I'm 32 years old. I live in Idaho, near Boise, and I have been actively interested in the occult for most of my life. I've spent a lot of time in study, a lot of time collecting old archaic books and reading said books. I've spent a lot of time practicing, both in groups and alone. I have been interested in the occult as a lifelong fascination, and sometimes that comes in the form of things that I don't think are real, things that I think are just silly, superstitious bullshit, that I'm just fascinated in the history and the beliefs of that time period, and, the groups of people and the makers and shakers that, made some movement happen. Sometimes it's that, and other times it is stuff that is a little more close to home, where I might have personal experience that leads me to believe that it's not superstition. I personally think that it's extremely important to attack especially these kind of subjects with an anti-faith concept. In most religious and spiritual ideals, there's an expectation that you believe for the sake of believing, that you believe because we'll show you later, and just have faith and it'll turn out. I think that mentality in the occult is dangerous, and that instead of just blindly believing anything that gets presented to you, that instead you should test and verify and document. And one thing that makes the occult in particular really difficult for that is that it's so subjective of a world that we're playing with. And we'll get a little bit more in depth into what I mean by that. But I suppose the point is, this has been a lifelong fascination and personal mission of mine to kind of get to the bottom of all of this stuff, if it's at all possible. And I have pulled a lot of meaning in my life from that. And so I intend to create this show in order to pass some of that meaning along, and hopefully encourage others to at least consider this as an option, at least be educated in what it is, so that if it's not for you, that doesn't mean that you have to judge your neighbor for living this particular type of a path. So that's who I am. A lot of people, I'm sure, are curious what kind of a person gets involved in this. I'm sure there's a stereotype, and I would like to kind of address who I am in a mundane sense, to kind of paint the picture that is what type of a person would even get interested in this kind of stuff in the first place. So one of the stereotypes that I feel personally probably exists is that individuals who are interested in this kind of stuff don't have a very solid education or a solid head on their shoulders, and that they are in some way, I don't know, intellectually defective or maybe emotionally defective in ways that they're like clinging on to fairy tales or something. That is definitely not where I feel that I fall. I have a bachelor's degree of science. I work in the STEM field for a major technology company. I can personally attest, I don't want to call out what company it is, but without naming specifics, it is the type of company that I guarantee everyone that is listening to this show has at some point used one of our products. I feel it's necessary to kind of point out that very real, intelligent professionals that exist in the world and are part of very real scientific and technological advancements could potentially be the individuals that are interested in the occult, and that doesn't diminish their ability to be a part of those kinds of projects, those kinds of life-changing technologies. So that's kind of what I do for a living. And the reason that I bring that up is not to, try to make myself out to seem anything, but I want to make sure that people listening don't feel as if the only reason that you would be interested in the occult is if you were mentally defunct, because I do believe that my industry is filled with a lot of very, very intelligent people, and I pride myself in being surrounded by those people. I love and respect them very much. So that's kind of where I come from, and my educational background and my professional background, without getting too much into specifics. Now I wanted to take a minute and kind of talk about the equipment, because I feel like before we get too far into this, we need to talk about the equipment. I know that there's a little bit of a buzz in the background, and as I've already kind of clued in on some of those technological things, I am doing this out of my home office, and in my home office I have a server that I use for personal reasons in order to host some websites and online services, and in order to, have a place to develop some of my personal skills. And so that server has to stay on, and I'm sure you can probably hear the hum in the background. And we're also running on some computers as we record this show. Currently, we have one single microphone. It's not a bad microphone, and it has a pretty cheap pop filter on it. Now, the reason that I bring all this up is because the audio quality is probably not perfect right now. It's probably enough that you can hear me, and that we can have this, long-form discussion about these topics. But I am aware that there's probably a little bit of a hum in the background, and that occasionally when I might have, this cheap pop filter not do a great job at keeping some of the, they call those plosives, keeping some of the plosives quiet. And so we are going to be, over time, improving our situation, one by one, swapping out different equipment and making a more professional space in order to record this show. So I really appreciate everybody's patience as we pull together all of the audio for this show. So the next thing that I wanted to talk about is, when did I first actually become interested in the occult? When did that change happen for me? I was raised in a very, very religious household. My parents actively practiced a form of Christianity that often has some connotations about it being a little bit more on the extreme end. And I was raised in a house where my parents were a little bit more into it than the other people at their church. And so even though they were already in kind of a very religious scenario, even other members of their church have brought up to me in my adulthood that they're a little bit more extreme than others, and that they're viewed in that way. Obviously, if you're getting something out of your religion, then I strongly encourage you to continue it, because that's kind of the point. But I felt at a very young age that I was not getting anything out of their religion. And so I was probably about 11 or 12 years old when I started to express, and I know I had been feeling this for a long time, but I didn't I wasn't confident bringing it up to my parents because I was afraid of what their reaction might be. But I started to express to them, finally, at about 11 or 12, that I intended to leave their religion. The reaction from my stepfather was pretty mellow. And I think he thought, he's at an age where he's going to be going through some changes, and he's going to start questioning some things, and that's okay. He's going to come back around. And the response from my mother was a very extreme, borderline violent response. There was the very first time that I decided I didn't want to go to church, and the response was that she would physically drag me down to a bar, which in her religion they don't drink, and they kind of view people who do as being actively in the process of messing their lives up. So she physically dragged me down there at 10, 11 years old and tried to get me to go into the bar in order to show me how wrong I was and what my life would be like and how miserable everyone around me would be if I left. And I remember not wanting to go in there, not because I was afraid of the people or anything, but just the whole behavior seemed so extreme and crazy to me, and not wanting to be a part of being, emotionally embarrassed by being a child who's being dragged in by some screaming lady who is trying to drag you into a bar, which I should mention, children are not legally allowed in bars, so my mother was actively attempting to break the law in order to show me how shitty my life would be. It was, there was a point in me trying to stop this from happening that I remember she grabbed my wrist and it hurt really bad. And she was trying to physically drag me into this place and I didn't want to go. And, it was just the, emotional embarrassment of the situation, I think. But I remember thinking, especially after that, that was the first time I said I didn't want to go to church. I remember immediately going home and thinking, like, I have to get away from this. That this, that anything, any ideology that could grab someone this extremely to make them react like that to a child is dangerous for me, and that I need to get out of it. And that's a pretty scary thought to have at 10 or 11, because where do you go? Who do you reach out to? What do you, I don't know. I still don't know the answer to that. I'm well into my adulthood. I have no idea what you're supposed to do when you realize that your parents are psychologically dangerous. What I chose to do was I isolated myself. I self-isolated in my own home. I spent a lot more time reading, a lot more time playing video games, one player. I spent a lot more time watching television. I spent a lot of time not interacting with the members of my household. It was a large family. I had my mother, my stepfather, my 3 siblings, and myself. And it's a lot of people to be ignoring and hiding from, but I couldn't get through to my siblings how I was feeling about all this. And we're not really sure why. But in that time, I found that just because I didn't believe their religion didn't necessarily mean that I had no desire or craving for the spiritual, the divine. And I think, like a lot of kids, I didn't have a whole lot of tools and frameworks that existed in my mind. I had never heard of, most other religions. I'm sure maybe I had heard once or twice in television, but I didn't have like a general understanding of what these other things were. I just knew what I had been told at church and what my parents had reiterated at home. And still to this day, my mother doesn't really have a lot of understanding. I was having a conversation with her the other day about other religious groups that live in her area, and she was pretty uneducated about even just the surface level of some of those other groups, like Buddhism and Hinduism, and she had never really been exposed to anybody who, through no fault of her own, she had never been exposed to anybody who was living some other spiritual path. And so at that age, none of that kind of stuff had been passed into me. I had never heard of the specifics on some of those types of religions, and so there really was in my mind only a couple of things. There was the church, and there was everything the church warned you against. And I didn't really understand any of the other things, that there was like, oh, there's other churches, and oh, by the way, it's not just other churches, there's also, other religions that have their own systems of churches and temples and mosques and all of those things. I had never been exposed to any of that stuff. I had only been exposed to, there's church, and then there's the bad guys. And so as I renounced church, specifically my parents' church, I did the only thing I could think to do, which was try to fill this large gaping hole that, is a spiritual paradigm, with the only other thing I knew existed, which in this case was like, witchcraft. And for me, I guess I was blessed that I grew up in the generation where we had access to the internet, but I was also cursed in that we had access to the internet because when you have no one to ask for, like, hey, what's a good book on this topic? You just grab whatever's available, and you don't have any compass as to, what's realistic, what's fluff, what's destructive, what's one crazy author's, interpretation of something. So it was tough the first couple of years. I'd say the first 5 or 6 were just, reading this book and thinking, man, I don't relate to any of this. This is crazy. And then reading this other book and being like, this is exactly right. And not really having a lot of a compass in order to figure out how to find the good information and how to not find the bad information. And also, at that age, I'm a child. I didn't have some of the framework to be able to identify the difference between this feels emotionally good because I have some personal weakness that it's preying on, and this author knows that I will keep buying his books and paying for his fucking coffee every day if he says things that make me feel good but are not the truth. Convenient truths versus inconvenient truths versus convenient lies. I didn't have a framework for understanding that. I just kind of was doing whatever. And so originally I was very interested in Wicca because that's the only one that I really had been exposed to. And then eventually Wicca didn't really mesh with me very well. Not to say that there's anything wrong with Wicca, but just me personally. I remember hearing a lot of people talk about that feeling of like coming home to Wicca, and it like feeling like you've returned to your family in a lot of ways that you didn't know was there the whole time. And always thinking to myself, like, I'm not having that experience. Like, I'm not feeling that at all. Like, I'm interested in this, and it's fascinating, and I'm very much like, I want to know more, but I don't feel at home, and I even when I'm around other Wiccans, I don't necessarily feel. It feels like Nate and the other Wiccans hanging out, not Nate and his family hanging out, like as one cohesive group. And so, eventually I started to experiment with some other stuff. I had learned a lot from the symbolisms and frameworks that enable you to look at the world in a different perspective. And I gained a lot from that, but I did find at some point it was lacking. And so I kept going, and that was this is the fundamental part of what has shaped my life in the way that it has, is that after I had found some interesting things, but still found myself like wanting more, I moved on to the next thing. So I started looking at just general paganism at that point. Wicca is a little bit more specific. Paganism is a little bit more of like a general umbrella. It shares a lot of the systems for, specific holidays and how you might go about doing a working and those kind of things. But it was kind of a little bit more of an umbrella. It had more subcategories under it that I was also interested in. And so I started studying general paganism. And when I was studying general paganism, I found myself becoming really interested in Norse paganism, because I really enjoyed the mythology and the art form and the symbols, and the fact that my personal heritage was kind of tied into that in some respect. And so I started looking into that kind of stuff, and it was interesting because when I was doing that, I was not around a whole lot of people that were also doing it. Now, as an adult, it's like everybody I know is a Norse pagan. It's crazy. Like, man, there's a lot of them. I don't know if this is a movement that has started since I started, or if it's just that I was isolated because I was raised in such a religious house that I didn't understand that these people were out there or how to contact them, and the internet was not anything like it is today, where you can just, go on 15 different websites and find everyone that's out there and chat with them on social media for 15 weeks, It wasn't that yet. And so at first, that was isolating in itself, was that I had found myself in such a rare thing within my personal sphere. And so eventually, as I started to work through that, I would say that phase probably took up a lot of my life until, I don't know, maybe until I was about 17 or 18, somewhere in that phase. And then I took a step away from a lot of spiritual things when I hit 18 to 20, 22. In a way, I did what most people do at that age. And if you're that age, I encourage you to, be true to yourself and just keep doing what feels right for a little while. Try to find out who you are. Unfold that giant mystery. It's okay. But so I did. I took a break, and it was a weird break, man, because I never really stepped away from the occult, but I stepped away from an active daily practice and like regularly reading in order to increase my knowledge on the topic. There were, times where I had within those years done a working, but I wasn't like actively trying to better myself in that respect for a period of time. And then life was, as I'm sure a lot of people go through, life was complicated. And I was trying to find my own way in it. And I did what I'm sure a lot of people do, where I lived pretty recklessly and then also completely demolished my life. And I found myself not having a lot of resources or people in my life, and not really surrounded by real friends, and just partying all the time. But even in those moments where I was partying all the time, I was still very much drawn to the philosophical conversations at the party. I wasn't as interested in just, I don't know, the hedonism of it. I was much more interested in like being in a room full of people and like I could find one of them that's, interested in this one topic. And I've been thinking about it a lot lately. And so I found myself at the party, but also not in the party, kind of like I felt in Wicca, where I don't know, I just found myself always pulling to the side of the party and talking to somebody about something deep, and because that's what I was interested in, And then eventually, after my life collapsed, like it does when you don't have a good plan and you don't have a lot of tools to make a life happen, because guys, life is complicated. It's so much of a balancing act. So when I was sitting in the ashes of it, I saw myself, I think, for the first time. Everything had collapsed around me. My life. I lost my girl, lost my home, lost my job, lost most of my possessions. I mean, just everything. Lost it all. And the only thing left was that sense of self, that sense of like what I was actually interested in. Why would I go to the party? It wasn't to listen to the music, which is a personal fault of mine. It's difficult to not hear the music, you know. It was so that I could go talk to people that were interested in these deeper spiritual concepts. And so I had finally found that gem in my soul, that meaning, and I started to put my life back together. And it was a very painful experience, and I made a lot of mistakes in the beginning. So from about 20 to, I'd say about, life starts to fall apart about 20. By 21, it's demolished. By about 22, 23, I start to put things back together, but I'm toxic. I'm so hurt by everything that happened that I made terrible, terrible first steps. I was just consumed by that pain and that anger and that just, man, it was a dark, dark time, and I was expressing it in all the wrong ways. I was expressing it in egotism, and I was expressing it in, you know, self-destructive behaviors, and I was being an asshole and manipulative to those around me, and I was, and everything felt shittier, but it was like, in a weird way, it was empowering. And so I just kept doing it. And eventually I worked through that pain, and I came out the other side, and I said, man, I gotta stop acting like this. And so at about like 25, probably, I started taking that spirituality seriously, and I start, you know, really delving back into it. I would say by like 23, I start delving back into it, and by 25, I'm consumed by it all over again, and it's the focal point of my life. And that's when all the meaning starts to enter. You know, I'm sitting in the ashes of my life, and, you know, by like 23 to 25, I start like building up this framework for how I want to live and how I want to be and how I want to, you know, how I want to go about this thing called life. And that's when I started delving into the deep waters of it, you know, the history, the individuals, who wrote this book, you know, where did he get his information, and where did that person get their information, and so on, and try to track back these rituals and rites and techniques and, you know, all of it, just tracking it back and trying to get like a full framework of where it all came from. And then finding myself also interested in things like philosophy, you know, like how much can your mind change when you're consumed by philosophy, and reading the greats and the literary greats over the years that have existed that are, you know, overlapping with the occult world. Some of them just through theme, you know, things like Milton's Paradise Lost, where it's, you know, I don't know that it is an occult manual, but it is sure as hell in the theme of something a little spookier and more interesting, and to me, you know. And so I started to really play around with this idea of like, who do I want to be, and what do I believe in, and how can I build this life in a way that, despite my previous failures and despite the fact that I burned down everything I loved, how can the rest of my life be positive? Because that was only, you know, 23 years. And what happens now? You know, I have to be alive for, what, 60 more years probably, if not longer. And I'm just going to be miserable the whole time. Like, I know I need some meaning in my life. And I found a lot of that in the occult. So that's how I came about to be who I am. And that's how I became interested in the occult, and how I kind of came to it one time and then found myself coming back to it a second time, and it was much deeper and more interesting the second time. And it has really shaped my personal development in a way that I don't think a lot of people expect, you know. So, man, I've used that word a lot. What is that? What is the occult? What does that word mean? So I have some definitions that I've pulled up, and you can easily find these definitions by either just Googling them or going to dictionary.com or opening an actual physical dictionary. I'm definitely a supporter of physical books in this house. So the definition of the word occult that I was able to found was supernatural, mystical, or magical beliefs, practices, or phenomena. Supernatural, mystical, or magical beliefs or practices. So it's the study of the occult is the study of things that are supernatural, mystical, and magical. So what does that mean, right? Well, supernatural, just defined as attributed to some force beyond scientific understanding or laws of nature, right? I find that the word supernatural is kind of a slippery slope, because on the one hand, that could mean a very real scientific thing that we just do not yet have understanding of. But on the other hand, it could be absolute hogwash that has just been passed down as old wives' tales over the years until people just accept it as truth, and that it's really just, exactly that, hogwash, right? So supernatural, mystical. So mystical meaning to do with mysticism. Now, mysticism was an established tree of understanding. It was focused around, and here's the definition I found: the belief that union with or absorption into the deity or the absolute or the spiritual apprehension of knowledge inaccessible to the intellect may be attained through contemplation and self-surrender. So mysticism exists in a lot of religions. There's Christian mysticism, there's Jewish mysticism, there's Hindu mysticism, there's just general mysticism. Mysticism can mean a lot of different things, but it's generally the belief of that union with the divine through knowledge that's inaccessible to the intellect, things that cannot be discerned through 1 + 1 = 2. And so some of that might be more subjective experiences, and some of that might be more emotional experiences, and some of that might be more symbolic experiences, but it's all in that realm of it's inaccessible to the intellect, but it can be found through contemplation and self-surrender. That's the idea there, right? So supernatural, mystical, or magical beliefs, and I think we're going to have to get pretty in-depth into what is magical beliefs. So that would be like study of alchemy, voodoo, some form of ritualized belief system. And throughout the course of this show, I think that we're gonna find that definition is not what we think it is. That it is a much wider branch than people might believe. All leading into many, many different spiritual traditions. And then it practice. Okay, so supernatural, mystical, or magical beliefs, practices, or phenomena. So practices would be the specific rites, the specific, daily practice. What do you do? And then phenomena, meaning a fact or a situation observed to exist or happen, especially one of those whose cause or explanation is in question. So it's something that happens and we're questioning why. Now, phenomena does not always mean that it has to be in some kind of an occult situation. It could be a scientific phenomena, it could be an astrological phenomena, it could be all sorts of stuff, but it's a happening that we're in the process of analyzing or studying and trying to figure out why. So that's our dive into what does the word occult mean. It's a big umbrella term for a whole bunch of different stuff. It could be secret societies, it could be witchcraft, it could be Kabbalah, it could be alchemy, it could be astrology, it could be just a whole plethora of different things. And for me, I'm interested in just about all of them. Some of them I'm interested only for the academic side of like, hey, this absolute pile of bullshit that's not real is interesting to know that, this, small tribe here and whatever year were interested in this, and this is the practice they were doing, and this is how it affected them, as a culture. So some of it, I'm just interested for, why do things happen? How does religion and spirituality affect human beings? It's a fascinating thing. And some of it, I'm much more interested in it for its actual application and how it works and how it interacts with my life and how it empowers me. So that's what the occult is. What is the occult not? What isn't it? I would say that it's not any Hollywood portrayal of itself. Jesus Christ. The internet offers you the option to go out and find so much information that eventually you start to realize that Hollywood is full of shit, and so is half of the internet. And one of the things that's very complicated is you go and you see a movie and it gets you all hyped up and you're like, man, that was so cool. I learned so much about those cool race cars that, man, did you know that that thing can go that fast? Did you see how cool that scene was and how interesting and exciting it was? I just can't wait to see the next movie. And, like, none of that is true. None of it. It's all absolutely terrible. The more I learn on any topic, supernatural or otherwise, the more I realize how ridiculous Hollywood is. All of the hobbies that I have, when they get displayed on television, I'm like, that's not even close to how that works. And the occult is no different. So I want to make sure that people don't think that this show is about, like, sing some words in Latin under the graveyard's arches and my hand bursts into fire. It's not about that, man. It's also, oh, that's weird. I wonder why my audio cut out for a second. It's back now. It's also not about, like, darkness. A lot of times it gets portrayed as being like, and you will sign in blood with your contract with the devil. It gets turned into that a lot. Generally, it's not. I would say that, like, 80% of the occult is not dark, and that the 20% that is barely dangerous. You do dangerous things all of the time. Every time you turn on the stove, it is potentially dangerous. Just learn how to not touch the damn burner, But you still want to turn the stove on occasionally and cook up some meals, right? I would say that it's similar. It is not about demons and devils and witches and that. It's not about that, man. Although it can be made out to be that way in certain circles, but those little 20% of circles that are like a great example might be like Levian Satanism, where it is a Satan-themed spiritual system. It's based on the Christian concept of the devil. However, the actual philosophy that is in it is not dangerous, in my opinion. So that would be an example of, like, the small 20% of things that are dark themed, but that are not nearly as dangerous as people are making all of them out to be. Specifically in that example, that's part of the point, and LaVey wrote pretty extensively on why. But I would say that most of the occult is actually kind of closer to Wicca, where they might use a word like witchcraft and they might use a word like witch, but most of it is this developing of a relationship with the energies and symbols that are in nature. Kind of like nature worship, Druidism is a really popular example where they believe that there's, some power and some divine source that exists in plants and certain sacred trees. And Wicca has some elemental systems of understanding the world around you. And, a lot of that breaks down to, nature and the divine power that's in nature. So I find that often these kind of things are much more down that road than any road of what Hollywood might portray as spooky. So that's what the occult's not. It's not a system of Latin words that you say out loud and then, like, I don't know, a shadow being appears in your room and rips your couch apart or something. I don't know. It's not that. It's not bursting forth flames and lightning bolts, and it's not that. It's not Harry Potter. It's not those kind of things, right? It's very important to understand the difference between fiction and reality. And by no means would I suggest that that fiction is what we're talking about. Although, sometimes fiction is interesting to read and can, act as a symbolic, philosophical exploration that can help you to understand the world around you. So fiction has its place as well. And it's not dark. Mostly. Of course, there are exceptions to that rule. But for the most part, the occult is actually the opposite. The example that I like to use when somebody asks what is the occult is I like to say that it's God in a Halloween mask. It sure is spooky, but the dude under the mask is very much a source of light and wisdom and on your side. So that's the example I use, God in a Halloween mask. So we've talked a little bit about what it's not, what it is. So what are my personal beliefs? What's my philosophy? And, where am I coming from? So I study everything. I am a universalist in that I believe that all systems have some value. And for a long time, as I kind of explained the introduction to my life and to this path, I was really angry at Christianity. And I was really angry at, the Judaic system, Judaism, Islam, and Christianity. I was so mad at it because I had felt emotionally hurt by individuals who were in that system, and I was associating that pain with that system. I no longer believe that. I am a true universalist. I believe that everything has value somewhere, some paradigm for you to observe the world is positive. And so I do sometimes look at Christianity for, insight. Interesting that they would write that down and it was meaningful enough for those cultures to, portray that. And why are they using this as a symbol? What's the point of that? And is there depth in all of this? And, but I would say that makes up a very, very small portion of my personal beliefs because I also feel the same way about all of the systems. I think the occult is kind of a passport that allows you to move between the nations that are religions. And your goal is to, find depth in this, find meaning in this. And so there's no reason why you can't go to some Hindu practice one day and find meaning and in that, and then go to some, Wiccan practice the next day, or some other, some Christian practice the next day, or, there's no reason why you can't move around and experience the divine from every angle and from every paradigm. There's no reason why you can't. And so my personal beliefs are very universal in the fact that I think that all of these cultures were founded, so long ago that the reason why they have stuck around is because they had value to someone, and someone tried to pass that value on through their own altruism and their own love and care. They found meaning in it, and they tried to give that meaning to somebody else, and that person found meaning in it, and they tried to give that meaning to somebody else, and then so on and so forth, and eventually it builds up momentum, and it starts to say, the only source of meaning is this one thing, and then it gets violent, and that's kind of what happens with religions. But that doesn't mean that there wasn't some valuable thing that got the ball rolling in the first place. And so my beliefs are very universal in the fact that I am interested in all of them. I will read some Buddhism one day. I will read some some Christianity the next day. I will look at some ancient religions like Egyptian and Greek, and just all over the spectrum. Very interested in philosophy as well, for the exact same reason. I think that even philosophies that I disagree with are paradigms for observing the world, and that they can benefit you. And so I do. I read philosophies that I know that I disagree with, in order to try to understand the perspective behind it and the real source of meaning behind it. However, as universal as I am, I have found a system that I self-identify with and that has benefited me the most. It is a system called Thelema. Thelema is a magical tradition started by an occultist in the, what would that be, the 18th century? 18th century is 1900s? Yeah, early 1900s. Started a system. His name was Aleister Crowley. I'm sure a lot of people have heard at least references to him in a lot of pop culture. For example, Aleister Crowley is on the cover of one of the Beatles albums that has all of those influential members of, individuals whose philosophies and work had influenced the band. It's Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Heart Club Band. On the cover, Aleister Crowley is in, I think he's in the back row, second to back row. I don't know. We could definitely look it up. I don't want to. All right, I'm going to look it up. Sgt. Pepper Lonely Heart Club Band album cover. Boom. He is. Let's see how fast I can find Crowley's face in it. Although there's other individuals here who are not interesting, so some of them I very much disagree with their personal ideas. He's in the very back row, top left, second from the far left. Yeah. So, Aleister Crowley has shown up in that pop culture. He has also shown up in, by namesake, in the show called Supernatural. If anybody's ever seen that show, there's a bad guy that shows up later in the show called Crowley, being I think they call him Crowley. And this is a very interesting point that Thelemites will bring up a lot, is that most of the world is mispronouncing his name. It's pronounced Crowley like holy, not Crowley like, meow. Yeah, it's Crowley. And the system that he founded was called Thelema, and it was based on this concept of will. It was a magical tradition. So we have rites and traditions and rituals that we'll practice on a regular basis. There's also 2 different secret society mystery schools that are associated with the religion. There's the AA and the OTO. OTO acts more as a fraternal bonds organization, bringing a large group of people together who all know each other, where the AA acts more as a educational, you are working through this particular set of materials under the instruction of one person who has already gone through that set of instructions, and you are instructing the person behind you who is going through the materials that you just went through. So it's more of an educational, here is how this works and here's the history of it. If you were to almost consider that being like almost like a college degree in magic and occultism. That's kind of what the AA is. Both of those were founded also, it's difficult to say founded, especially in the case of the OTO. Both of those were heavily influenced by Aleister Crowley. And then the overarching religion that he had, and philosophy that he had founded, was Thelema. Thelema is the Greek word for will. Shows up in the Greek Bible quite a bit. In the concept that people say God's will be done, the word in there would be Thelema. It gets mispronounced a lot too. Thelema is Thelema. Man, I've heard it pronounced a whole bunch of different ways, but pronunciation I usually go with is Thelema. It's the concept of will. I see it multiple times in the Greek Bible describing divine wills. So, God's will be done, or the devil's will be done. Those kind of things. It shows up in those contexts. So that's not usually in the context of like willpower. So I think that's kind of an important note as to like what the whole point of Thelema is. And it foundationally is formulated under a couple of key points, key phrases. The first being, do what thou wilt, should be the whole of the law. And then that is further expounded by, love is the law, love under will. I don't want to get too in-depth into interpreting Thelema for others, because the system is very much built around the individual and the individual's personal journey with the concepts. But there's generally an understanding in Thelema that there's a difference between wants and will, and true will. So there's like a difference between thine will being done versus I want it, give it to me, if that makes sense. So my personal philosophy is very tied into Thelemic concepts of, individual will, freedom of expression, freedom of all individuals to express themselves as they see fit, and that it's not really my business how anybody else chooses to live, just like it's not any of your business how I choose to live, unless I decide to broadcast that on the internet. And then you can, have an opinion about it, but you also can't physically stop me from, going about it. So that's some of the Thelemic concepts that are very important to me as a person. And as I said, it is a magical tradition. So there are aspects, just like in Wicca, where an individual might experiment with symbols, experiment with energies, experiment with frameworks through magical ritual. So that has led me to a lot of self-discovery and a lot of developing of my own personal identity, because I'm surrounded by other people who also believe that religion, and therefore they are encouraging me to do things my way as opposed to doing it their way, just like I'm encouraging you to do this your way instead of doing it my way, because you will find that your way works for you for a reason, and that you'll find out a lot about yourself in that process. And I think knowledge of the self is a very powerful and potent thing. And the more that you understand yourself, the more control you can have of yourself, and the more you can exert your will upon the universe. By understanding, hey, every night at 3 p.m. I get super fucking hungry for Cheetos, but I'm also trying to lose weight. What if I went to bed at 2:30? There's power in understanding yourself and your own patterns and your own flaws and your own strengths. And so because my philosophy and my experience with magic has led to a lot of self-discovery, it has also led to a lot of power over my life in ways where I feel self-empowered by my own knowledge of who I am as a person, what kinds of things make me upset, and how I react when I'm upset can give me power over staying in control when I'm upset. What kinds of things make me happy can help me to feel fulfilled. It can empower me to do the things that I love more often, instead of the things that are expected of me by others. And so, I think that magic and the occult have very much influenced that process in myself, finding who I am, what I believe, finding meaning in symbols and ideas, and empowering myself to live as I feel I should by the use of those symbols. So that's my personal beliefs. Why make this podcast? That's a good question. Why would I do this? The answer is, the short answer is because it has been meaningful for me. The long answer is that during COVID, when the COVID-19 virus ravaged ravaged, whether that's just personal lifestyles, whether it's economically ravaged your area, whether it physically killed a bunch of people and it ravaged the lives of those around you. I think it definitely ravaged a lot of lifestyles, regardless of opinions on this or that or who and why. COVID had a very intense effect on me. And this is what the effect was. Before COVID, I was actively practicing the occult, but I was doing so in secret, hiding, because I was terrified that my boss would find out, or my friends would find out. Don't get me wrong, I had occult friends. But I also had some mundane, normal friends, and I didn't know how they would react to these kind of things. And so a lot of times I would steer away from the topics, and I find myself muted and uninteresting because I was sitting in the corner of the room hiding who I was. I was living in a closet in a lot of ways. And then COVID happened, and my job moved me home. They said, we want you to work from your home. And so I spent a couple of years in my office. Luckily, I had an office. It was not very many years ago where I didn't have an office, where we barely scraped by. And so by luck, I had an office, and I could work from home as they requested. And then something interesting happened because I was in isolation. I was a hermit, withdrawn from the world, hiding in my house for years. For literal years. Because the whole first year, I was working for one company, and everyone was at home. And for the whole second year, I got a job with another company, and they said, hey, we just want you to work from home indefinitely. You know, you're already set up for this, and we want you to continue to do this. And what that meant was that I didn't have anyone to fake it to anymore. I didn't have to fake it. I could just authentically be myself. I could genuinely be who I am all of the time. It wasn't just when I got home, clocked off, and was exhausted from the day. It was 100% of my life was now in my hands, and I could be who I am all the time. And that was fascinating because it meant that I could say, you know what, it's my lunch break, and I'm at home, and I have the privacy that exists at home, and I'm going to read this old occult manual that if I was in the office, I wouldn't want someone to walk past me and look and be like, why are you reading the history of witchcraft in the 1600s? What is the... And then a week later, you know, walk past and be like, well, demonology, and what are you doing? You know, like, I didn't have to do that anymore. I was in my home, and I could just read whatever I wanted to read whenever I wanted to read it. And I could, well, what if I had like a solar adoration that I was doing, and I would, you know, it's lunchtime, and normally when I'm at work, the sun is high noon in the sky, and I want to do something like Liber Resh, which we'll probably talk about at some point in this show. And, you know, I wouldn't be able to do Liber Resh because there would be people watching. But at home, there wasn't anybody watching. Now, doing this for a short period of time is one thing, you know? It's like, oh, that was a nice refreshing. But doing this for 2 solid years meant that I didn't have to be anything other than what I am. And I forgot how to pretend like I was different. I forgot how to pretend to be normal in those 2 years because I was authentically myself. And then the world opened back up, and my friends started going back out to parties and concerts and bars, and they started to invite me out, and I was like, I don't know what to do because I don't remember how to pretend. Who was I pretending to be before? There was a character that I had built up, and a mask, and a costume that I was wearing when I went in public, and I would like go through these motions, these lines that I had like saved up, and I had like built this persona, this character. It was a character in a play, and I forgot the lines, and I forgot everything about that character in those 2 years because I was just myself. And it was actually a little bit longer than the 2 years because just before COVID had happened, I had just been going through college. And in college, I didn't have a lot of spare time. I spent all of my time working academically. I was either doing homework or I was doing work or I was working full-time or taking care of my family full-time. And so there wasn't time for me to maintain personal relationships. And so the combination of those things happening meant that when I emerged from my home after COVID, and things started to happen again, I no longer remembered the character I was playing before, and that character's social circle had died. And so I didn't have to pretend who I was anymore, unless I wanted to. And if I decided to do that, I would have to make a new character. And it was an incredibly terrifying period of my life because I wasn't sure if I was going to go back into the closet and hide again, or if I was just going to be this person and embrace it. And some experiences happened to me through frequently doing rituals in the privacy of my own home over the course of those 2 years that led me to believe that I would be missing out on something in my life if I went back into that hidey hole, back into that character. So why make the podcast? Well, because I gained all this meaning and I got out, and now I want you to have the meaning. I do. I genuinely want you to have it. I don't want you to be the character anymore. I might be talking to one single human being. I don't know who it is. I might be hitting some heartstrings for a bunch of human beings. I don't know. But this might be a message for one human being. And if it is, I am okay with doing that. I am willing to make this podcast and spend hours and hours and hours and thousands of dollars to try to send this message out into the internet and find one human being who needs to hear it. I made this so that you wouldn't have to go back into the closet, so that you would come out and be yourself authentically, because I'm out now and I can't go back. And I'm terrified that we all made all this progress and we can't go back. It's a scary time. I'm scared, you know? I don't know what's going to happen. I don't know what my mom's going to do. I don't know if she'll accept me. I don't think she will. She never has before. She never accepts anybody that's different from her religious perspectives. So, you know, I'm going to lose some relationships with people around me. I'm scared about how my dad's going to react. You know, he's a simple guy. He's a very mundane man. He doesn't delve into the spiritual in this sense. He's got his beliefs. He sticks to them. He's a good person. He's morally upstanding. He's a good member of his community. I strongly believe that he's a valuable member of society. But he's not interested in the things I'm interested in. So I wonder that maybe he's too pragmatic and can't understand where I'm coming from with all this, you know? But I'm feeling those fears, and I think that someone else out there is feeling those fears too. And there's another reason why I created this podcast, and it has to do with a period of my life that got really, really fucking hard. And I suppose there should be a trigger warning on this, because we are going to talk about suicidal thoughts. So, there was a period in my life just before college where I was working as a security guard. And working as a security guard is really difficult work for some people and really not difficult for others. I thought that it wasn't going to be difficult for me because I'm generally very mentally resistant towards certain types of things. And I found that I was wrong. So one of the things that's very complicated about working as a security guard is that human beings are social creatures by nature. And acting as a security guard is to go at night and go through a whole bunch of empty buildings and make sure that all the doors are locked and all the windows are locked and nothing's broken and all the security systems are working correctly and nothing's been vandalized and that there's no people in the buildings. And then if you run into a person, it's not a good thing. It's sometimes it's not a big deal. You know, sometimes it's like, oh, hey, I just used my key to get in. I'm supposed to be here. I just needed to grab some extra papers from the office and leave. Sometimes that's what it is. But other times it is someone who is breaking and entering or vandalizing or, a vagrant who is, broken in order to maybe not steal, but in order to get some warmth and get out of the rain, My heart goes out to those people. But, security guard thing was very difficult because it's a very, very busy job because you have to go from this place to this place to this place to this place, and if you sit down for 5 minutes, you're going to be behind all night. But it's a very isolated job because there's nobody else. There's no one else awake. It's not like a job where if you're feeling down, you can reach out to someone because they're, at their work and they're bored or they're at home or, they're watching a movie or something and you could reach out and say, hey, I need to talk to somebody. And there's no sunlight because it's nighttime. You spend a lot of time walking around empty buildings and it gets into your head because something about, they call it, what is it, liminal? Yeah. There's a great Reddit about liminal spaces. It's the spaces between. It's that weird, creepy feeling you get at a bus stop because you've never been here before, but it looks like every other bus stop, and it's not really designed to be a space that you spend any real time in. It's just a place between places. It's like the hallway of a hotel room. You're at a hotel and you're walking in the hallway and all the doors look identical and you've been through other hotels before, but this one is its own thing, but it's not really a place. It's like a place between the lobby and the bedroom that you're going to sleep in. And really the hotel itself is liminal, and liminal spaces are kind of creepy and eerie, but they're creepy and eerie because they just feel a little wrong because no one really spends a lot of time in those places, right? Well, as a security guard, you live in liminal spaces. The whole world is a liminal space. You're in hospitals after they close down the facility, and you're checking to make sure all the doors are locked. And so you're walking down hospital with a flashlight because you don't want to turn the lights on because, it slows your day down. So you're like wandering through what feel like abandoned building. It's like walking around in the apocalypse. It's nighttime. There's no cars driving around. You haven't seen a human being in 3 weeks. The sun hasn't, you haven't seen the sun either. And it fucks with you. Slowly, over time, I started to develop anxiety and depression. Really, really bad depression. And I started to lose my grip on what was happening. And there was a period in my life where I was considering killing myself. And it was because I was alone. I was so alone. There was nothing. There was nobody. It was just empty doors leading to more empty doors for years. And, man, it was really hard. I would say a year. For about a year. It was nighttime and there were no people. And there was one or two people that I got opportunities to talk to. I didn't really see my family a lot during that period of time because I was working nights and my wife was working days. And so I would get home. We were sharing a vehicle. And so I would get home. She would say, hey, babe, I'm already late. I got to go. Where's the keys? I love you. I'll see you later. And then I would go to bed. And the sun would, come up and and then the sun would go down, and I would wake up, and I was still getting, you know, I'd wake up in the evening, you know. The sun hadn't quite gone down yet, but I wouldn't really get some time in the sun, you know. And yeah, it was just always dark and creepy and anxiety-ridden, and every human being was a threat, and you never talked to people. And after a while, I started to be depressed, and I started to feel isolated. And in this particular situation, I chose to just go balls to the wall with magic, to just... I mean, there was nothing stopping me from... What I ended up doing was a practice of asceticism, where I like heavily fasted for many, many days in ritual settings. 22 days I spent fasting. When you fast for more than a certain amount of time, you need to have fasting food. But that food that I was supplementing was like flavorless, you know, so I wasn't getting any strong flavors. It was like black beans and I think, was it brown rice or white rice? I can't remember. But it was just purely for sustenance, you know, to keep your body going. It's very hard on your body to do this. And anyway, I remember that period of time and that loneliness and that needing an escape. And at the end of it, that's what the escape was I did a very intense 22-day ritual, and a lot of praying and contemplation and, you know, those kind of things. And at the end of it, I started school. And then several weeks after I started school, on day 20, I started school. About 1 week after starting school, I was offered a new position, and it was daylight, and it was in an office, and I was surrounded by people again. Now, am I saying that the ritual made that happen? I don't know. What I'm definitely saying is there was a moment of ritual catalyst in my life that after I did that, I made some changes, and I got out, and it was very hard psychologically to re-enter into society. And it took me some time to get used to being around people again. And then I was just surrounded by people all the time. It was crazy because I was doing school and my family was awake and it was in the office and there's like a million people around and it was like too loud and everything's fucking all the time. It was just crazy, you know? It was like being immersed in the opposite. And yeah, it was a wild transition and it was very intense. So, backtrack a little bit. Why would that experience make me want to make a podcast? Why make this podcast? Because I remember when the only lifeblood, the only string in my life that I was hanging on to for dear life, when I was genuinely committing the psychological, threatening thoughts, I remember clinging on to podcasts because there was a person talking to me, and I couldn't talk to them back, you know, but I would listen to a lot of podcasts because I was alone, and I constantly felt myself wanting a deeper, more interesting podcast. You know, I would listen to some, like, I don't know, some fun comedians. There were some great podcasts out there that, you know, people would just sit down, have a good conversation. It was fun. It was interesting to listen to them. Sometimes it got deep, sometimes it didn't, you know, and it was great. And I remember that being really meaningful in my life because there was like some kind of, you know, it was prepackaged, but it was some kind of human interaction. And I really appreciated that, and it kept me going for a long time. But I remember in that period always wishing that there was a good occult podcast so that I could listen to and learn more about something. And so I wanted there to be like, man, what if there was just like a podcast where like somebody did like an episode on, I don't know, the element of air, and I could like listen to, you know, oh, I never really thought about that, but it does tie into that other concept. Or what if there was like a show where, you know, somebody talked about like, I don't know, the Golden Dawn and, you know, like the history of the individuals and what happened with that, you know? And oh man, that would be really cool to to learn more about that kind of stuff. And man, wouldn't that be awesome? And I couldn't find one. There were a couple of okay ones out there, but for whatever reason, I wasn't finding what I was looking for. And so here we are. I bet there's somebody out there that deals with a lot of isolation, maybe not to the same extent, or maybe to the same extent, I don't know, but that clings to podcasts as this method of, getting some human interaction and some new interesting information and some education on certain topics. And man, wouldn't they benefit if they were me a couple of years ago? Wouldn't I benefit from the podcast that I intend to make right now? Isn't that what this is? I think I would, and there wasn't the thing out there yet that I was able to find. And so I'm hoping that if you're the person that's feeling alone and isolated and you're interested in these kind of topics, I hope that you can take something positive out of this and something empowering out of this. And maybe one episode is total bullshit, and it's just interesting to hear a little bit about. And maybe one episode is a defining spiritual concept for you that opens a massive door of love and light into your, personal little universe there. And great, awesome, because that's why I want to make this podcast. The occult has been meaningful to me. And I have felt the loneliness of clinging to podcasts for any kind of interaction. That's why I want to give that to you. So I think that's a pretty solid first episode. I hope that this path can be as beneficial to you as it has been to me. Or I hope that if you're just listening to this just to understand a little bit more about some other people that exist in your world, I hope that you can listen to this podcast in an open-minded way that will allow you to at least understand the beliefs of some other people that are around you, and maybe that empowers you to treat those around you with love and respect. So, thanks for listening to the Whitewood Podcast. This show is made possible by our Patreon members. You can find us on Twitter at Whitewood Show and on Facebook at Whitewood Podcast. For links to all our social media and information about our Patreon, visit us at whitewoodpodcast.com.